anytime you build a bigger table, or anytime you're privileged enough to invite more voices into the discussion, you should. And one of the things that I've always liked about our commonalities in our career is we both served as principals, and we had this opportunity at the school level every day to invest in relationships. And I would say during the time we were coming up, both of us had this common ethos around no significant learning could occur without a significant relationship, to borrow from James Comer. But I don't know that we'd gotten into equity in the way we think about it today. I think we were always disposed towards being frustrated collectively that our students or our staff did not have the opportunities we wanted for all. But the way we've kind of evolved in that discussion, from leading at the building level to now nationally, I know New Tech in particular has made equity a focus and is doing work to ensure that all of the schools in its network are really putting that as a priority. So I'd love to hear, and I know our audience would, about the work that's going on at New Tech now and kind of what you folks are up to.
Yeah, you know, Bryan, I think that we have always constructed our model as an instrument of equity. And when I talk about our model, I'm really talking about the heart of that model being a different set of outcomes that matter. And they're outcomes that, from our origin story back in the mid-90s, the business community said to us in Napa, California, where our first school was, and we've now grown to this thriving network of several hundred schools across the country. But they said, you know, you're producing graduates that, you know, graduate high school, can go to college, can actually graduate college, and then they come to work for us. And there's a gap between the scores that they've achieved and all that comes with that, and the skills that we need them to have. We need them to be empowered agents of their own learning and work, and they just aren't coming to us with those skill sets. And so the system was designed really to produce students who could pass tests and master content and demonstrate that reliably over time. And what they really asked us to do is to co-construct a very different, at that point, high school experience only, now we're K-12, that helps students develop collaboration and communication skills and to really foster a more comprehensive academic preparation. And that required a really different type of schooling. And we selected project-based learning, which, you know, I think of as an asset-based equity pedagogy, right? So if we just talk about the instructional heart of our work as an equity pedagogy, it's sort of always been central. And we selected that because students could engage in authentic, meaningful work that was connected to all the standards they had to learn, but really gave them a why for learning it and a how for how they might use that knowledge and apply it to their community to contribute to the problems that they were trying to solve. And it just really required a learner-centered focus. And when you and I came up in school, and probably when we both started teaching, it was all about the teacher, right? It was all about what we knew and could share. And I'll confess that, like, I didn't know that we had students with learning disabilities. I didn't know that we had students who were English language learners because I never saw them in my academic preparation. Right. They were invisible in the system and set aside. And what we wanted to do in the network is detrack. We wanted to bring together all the students so that we could learn together and move forward together. And so PBL really provided that conduit for us to have a purpose, to have students collaborate, communicate, solve problems, and develop the agency that we know they need to be successful.
Now, a lot there that we are also vibing on at Setser Group from a standpoint of what we're seeing now in, well, we really saw it before COVID, is that people were so concerned with the floor, what those standardized test scores looked like or how they were going to be evaluated, that they weren't really going with a both and mentality towards college work and readiness assessments, how they were going to move into career and life. And I love this focus at New Tech on sort of equity-based pedagogy wrapped around problem solving, problem-based inquiry. And frankly, that's what we're doing at Setser Group for the workforce. We're trying to help people on the workforce side understand that the way you solve problems collectively as a team or as a part of an overall problem set is going to make you more effective. You know, some of the things that we're seeing in our work with the University of South Florida's course in diversity in the workplace, for instance, is that if you give a problem to 3 white guys, you're going to get an outcome. But if you give that same problem to a diverse set of people, 7 to 8 out of 10 times, that solution is going to be better because of the lived experiences of who's solving it or who's involved. And so I think one of the things New Tech really does well is present that opportunity for every student to be a part of solving those problems, a part of a team, to look across how they're going to work in teams. So they come out, I think, with stronger skills, knowledge, and dispositions to go to college, to go to career, because they've been through that process at New Tech. You know, how do you get past some of these from here and come here arguments? How do you help leaders understand that just because where they're starting, they can actually, you know, enact the leadership and change necessary to move to some of these equitable solutions? How do you work with them on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just starting with an acknowledgement that it's really hard, right? None of us have all the answers. If we did, we would have already solved this problem. And so how do we together ask the right questions and focus on improvements that none of us expect for any of them to flip a switch and for it all of a sudden to be better? This work is a journey. And by the way, there's like no sense of a finish line, right? We're never going to arrive at an ideal solution. We're always going to be incrementally advancing toward that. And so we really sit down with communities, and I do this very often at the front end of our planning work, and then we continue that in implementation. But we sit down with our communities and ask them, you know, what are the drivers for you seeking a different type of learning outcome for your students? You're clearly not happy with the outcomes you're getting for all students.
Right.
And so that does require that we do some things differently. So let's put on the table all of the things in the system. Let's really see the system and put on the table all those things that get in the way, that are barriers for the outcomes that you want. And then let's, intentionally design some solutions and be disciplined about enacting them so that we can see if it actually works. And sometimes it's just, they don't know where to start.
Right.
It's this impossible, enormous challenge in front of them. And when we really break it down into some component parts and can begin to execute a plan around whether it's wireless access points through buses or the McDonald's Wi-Fi or driving up to the school on a Saturday with some buddies so that you can get on the Wi-Fi, like all those things come into higher resolution, and it helps just make them feel like it's possible. You got to just take baby steps toward the next right move. But certainly doing the same thing we've always done or doing nothing is going to be insufficient, and it's not going to get the outcomes they want. And so, you know, are we committed to the change or not? And if we are, let's try some things differently.
Yeah, I love that. And I was reminded, you know, as our relationship has unfurled over the years, we have this sort of shared interest in learning. And one of the things that we've done quite often together is study visits, or, you know, I've asked you, can I bring a team to see the New Tech culture in this area of the country? Can we understand a little bit about how this works in a day in the life or a week in the life? And one of the tactics that I try to get superintendents and chancellors and leaders to see is that you have to have a learning agenda. Your comment about we don't know all the answers, or we don't know all the answers from our neighbors. I think one of the challenges we have is, you know, a couple people get together over steak dinner and they say, what are you doing? And what are you doing? And I'll do that, instead of really going deeper on what are the, you know, risks, what are the opportunities, who's doing work that's exceptional. And I think very early on, we hacked sort of the Stanford and the liberatory design process to look at, were we diverse enough as a firm? Were we serving diverse clients? How were we engaging diverse opportunities with interns? And did we have the training and knowledge and skills and dispositions to get into that work? And I know you've participated at the board level in that, and thinking about, you know, equipping our capacity and being a part of our capacity for growth, so that if we want an equitable and just society, one of the first things we have to do is commit to where we are and what we need to learn and how we need to be inclusive. After we do that, we need to practice, iterate, fail forward, invite other people in to look at our designs that previously weren't even asked, and then to be able to put in leadership positions folks who do not look like us so that they can engage and work in ways that we're not even, privy to or aware of in terms of lived or shared experience. So I've heard a few things today. I've heard access to ensure sort of this, equity in a digital world. I've heard design and how this sort of problem-based pedagogy makes sense, not only for schools, but workplaces. And now where we're arriving is this intentionality around diversity, equity, and inclusion design, but through digital mediums, right? So one of the things I wanted to ask you kind of as a final way for us to think about it, and I'm happy for you to challenge me on this, but I wanted to have a dialogue, is I see a lot of critical race theory in the space, and it's very positive, and in my view, and people need to be aware of that. Very simple examples like, do we understand that much of the narrative we've read was not written by BIPOC authors? So at a content or a curriculum level, that's kind of an easy thing to look and audit your catalog and say, maybe we need to think differently about our resources and how we put things into play. But as you also study things like critical race theory, you get into, well, what are the acts and laws that were prohibitive for so many years that have really fostered the systems that we're encountering today? And some of them are still in place. How do we ensure that zip codes don't determine our schools? I know one of the awesome things around new tech is that, once you have that kind of opportunity in a school district, that often students come from different places and different spaces to be a part of it. And that in itself becomes a platform for where they're headed. So I give some of that context to say that going diverse, equitable, and inclusive in a digital world, I'd kind of like to end there. Like how are we moving both of our shops into Zoom, into LMSs like Echo, into Slack, or into supports or help desk? How can we be thoughtful around equity in those scenarios as we're sort of re-emerging to this next normal? And do you think it's important?
Yeah, I do think it's important. And I think we spend an awful lot of time as a network trying to listen, to lead in this space. And so our last leadership summit was really oriented around that notion of a listening leader and how in a digital environment can we find opportunities to listen. And so one of my coworkers was doing some work with the District of Columbia schools that we serve the last week. It was on Thursday. And they had put together some Zoom interviews of students so that faculty could listen to students' voices. Students that they had not seen this entire school year, right? Had not been able to come to school. Students who may or may not have turned on their camera during, instruction if it was live, right? And the power of listening to those student voices and the way it just filled up the teachers' souls for like, yes, this is the work I want to do. This is why I came into education. It's not just because I loved high school English or grammar, which I do, by the way, but it's because I want to teach people. I want to make, better people. And so doing empathy interviews and designing with, to your point about liberatory design processes, like that's foundational. And we do all that so that we don't just come in with, here's an answer I've seen applied somewhere else, and I'm not going to pressure test it. I'm just going to implement it. Yep. It's sort of like ready, fire, aim, right? I'm just going to put some stuff in place. And a lot of people, the crisis really did create that environment, right? We had to put some things up that we were ill-equipped to sort of do as a K-12 public ed. But our schools are really thinking about continuing to drive project-based learning in a digital space. We're finding all sorts of solutions to do that, to continue to let students work with our business partners and their student peers that they're collaborating with on a project, to engage in really complex problem solving, and all of it, being focused on learner-centered, growth-oriented sets of outcomes, not merely performance, but also this growth orientation, which I think is really important. And doing all of that in a digital space. requires us to listen differently. Whose voices do we not hear?